Hi, welcome to this episode. Here we are going to deal with a system that allows us to fetch our articles from the database and display it on the home page. So like I mentioned earlier on, to interact with that database, we could use a GUI or graphical user interface to do that, which we did with Heidi's. In my case, Heidi SQL. Let me write it well. Heidi SQL. So some of you might be having PHP my admin, PHP my admin, or any other tool used to interact with your database. So in this case, since we are going to now interact with our database from our code, because all these articles we have at the index page, on the index page here, have to be dynamically fetched from the system. So to be able to do that, it means this index page should be able to interact with our database systems, and for it to be able to interact with the database system, it has to be able to identify itself. If you recall, when I tried signing in to my database, it asked me that it told me I did not have a valid username and password, because actually I needed to enter what we call my SQL-user, and then I'll specify the user I'm going to use. So in our case, like localhost, and then the password, nothing, with no password. So our application needs to be able to interact with the database, so it has to have that connection, just like our Heidi got the connection, right? Just like the way Heidi got the connection to the database management system. So that's where PHP PDO comes in. So PDO, like I said, is a class or a set of classes or functions developed by the PHP team in order to help us or make it easy for us to interact with various database management systems. Previously, we used to have MySQL, what we call the adapter. So these are adapters. So we had MySQL, and then we had MySQLi. So MySQLi is still used, but MySQL has been deprecated since I think PHP 5 point something. So in our case, we are going to use PDO. Here is the PDO's official documentation page. So this tells us how we can start using PDO. So it's actually PHP code. So the PDO class is like, you have to create a connection to the database system like this. And these are the parameters required, the DSN. And the DSN consists of a URI and so on. So that's the format of that parameter, the DSN. So once you provide the DSN, you need to provide the username for the database, a password, and then some other options. The options allows you to direct PDO on how it should behave on some occasions. And this is an example of how the DSN is defined. And you can see here we have MySQL. And they said in the DCN structure, you can see here the URI here. That's the URI. And that URI is actually the actual adapter we are going to work with. And here is the list of the databases adapters. So these are the adapters written to help you interact with various databases, types. So like I mentioned earlier, we have PostgreSQL, SQLite, Oracle database, MySQL server databases, then MySQL itself, which is the one we are going to be using here, and Informix and IBM, Firebird, MS SQL, so on and so on. So it's almost all possible database systems you could think about right now. So in our case, we are going to deal with MySQL. And so this is a documentation on how that you can use it and so on, and the various parameters. We are going to need some of these parameters here. So it means in our case, if we look at our code, basically we are going to have some PHP code here. So let me just prototype it for you to understand the idea. We'll have a PHP code here, which will have, let's say, a list of articles, fetched from the database. So let's say fetched from database, right? So once we have that list here as a variable, we are going to go through this list. We'll say, okay, for each article in the database, that's the ID. So let's say index as article. We should now display this. So it means we are going to get rid of all these articles, and then for each one of these articles we are going to display the article structure here, but by filling in now the actual articles title dynamically, then the excerpt dynamically, and then the author's name dynamically, and then the publication date dynamically. So basically that's what we need to do here. So it is important to have that list of articles fetched from the database, and in order to be able to get that list of database articles fetched from the database, we need to be able to connect to that database. So let me revert everything here, and this is the next thing we need to do to create the connection to our database. So I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to say save it, db connection.php. So that's what this file is going to be used for. And remember, we could use a require. So once we create a connection here, we can require that file on any of our files in order to have the database connection and use it. So here we are going to create the connection to our database and make it available to whatever file that includes that database connection. So we'll go ahead and open our PHP. So we can go ahead and open our PHP codes like this. So this is going to contain PHP. So now let's look at how that connection is made. So it is said that we have to instantiate the PDO controller constructor like this. So basically, let's gather the information we need, the various variables we need. So we need the DSN. So let's say variable DSN equals to, so it's comprised of the adapter MySQL colon, then next the file path to DSN file. So basically this means the database, and in our case, what database are we going to use? So we have DB name. What is our database name? So it is also, let me keep it as a variable. So I will need the database name. So database DB name like that. Now database is called PHP Broadcasting Network. Then we'll also need database username. So user name. And our user, in our case, the user is called root. It's my default user. Then we also need in database password, the access to the the database system requires a password. In our case, I did not set any password. So yes. Then the host. So the database host. So let me put that right on top here. Database host. And in our case, it is localhost or 127.0.0.1. So that is it. So these are the parameters we need here to be able to do it. So I'm constructing the DSN here. So the DSN is comprised of the MySQL database name. Then let's concatenate the database name. Then after the database name, we need to specify the host. So separating them with a semicolon. The semicolon is a string, so we have to concatenate it as semicolon. And then we need to follow it with host equals to. So host equals to, and here what are we going to provide? We'll concatenate it with a variable which is the host here, database host. Right, so once that's done, we are done with our DSN structure. So MySQL, the adapter, MySQL, the adapter, then DB name, the database name, host, which is the host name. So once we have our DSN structure defined, we can now create a connection to our database system using PDO. So to create that connection, let's say we name that connection, or let me just name it something simple as DB connection. So let me make it DB connect, or DB underscore connection, so that it is more meaningful. And that DB underscore connection will now be a new instance, so a new PDO class, which requires, as you could see, if you look at the structure here, it requires the DSN, which is mandatory. Then optionally, you can specify the username, password, or options. So, and it means you can have a connection to a database which does not require username and password, so an authentication. So in that case, the only required parameter is the DSN, yes. So in our case, our database requires the username and password at least. So we'll go ahead and then specify the DSN. Then we already have our database username. Then we also have our database password. So database password specified. So for the options, we'll come back on that later on. We might need to define some options. So I think that is it. So once that's done, I can go ahead and give it a try and see. Let me var dump the database connection and see if we get something. Of course, at this point, nothing will happen when I visit our application, because that file, which is the database connection, is not used anywhere yet. So let me now bring it in our index page so that we can be able to use it. So I'll put it right on top of our HTML content, which is here. So I'll open a PHP section and I'll close that PHP section because we are having HTML content on this page. So this page is actually a mixed page. It has HTML code and then it is going to also have PHP code. So it is very important to open the PHP and then also close it somewhere so that it does not have conflicts with the HTML code. So here, let me require once. What do we want to require? We want to require the DB connection.php file. So by doing that, it's like we are bringing everything we've written here in at this level, at this particular position. This is basically equals to all this collected and then placed here. So the reason why we have to separate all this on a different or a separate file is because we don't want to be repeating this on top of all our pages where we will need a database connection. So it is important to abstract it out on a different file, then now take that file and call it whenever we want it or wherever we want it, just like this, and it's cleaner and easy to maintain. So once that's done, we can now refresh our index page to see if we have that connection. Let's see that. So it's telling us uncaught PDO exception so new could not make because target machine actively refused the connection stack and so on. So this is something we would always like to take care of. So you see, uncaught PDO exception. So this means that there's an exception, there's an error connecting to the database, but we could not also catch that error. So to usually avoid that this issue and then be able to catch that error, we'll wrap the PDO connection through the try catch exception construct, and then here we are going to catch PDO exception. So here we are going to try the connection to the database, and if there's any PDO exception, we'll try to catch that exception, or any PDO error, we'll catch it here, and then we'll say, okay, echo the error which is now saved in the variable e, and then we would like to get message. What is the error message? So this will give us a cleaner error. So let me now refresh again and see. Great. So this time around I'm getting a different error which says no connection could made because the target machine actively refused it. Notice undefined variable db connection. So on the db connection.php on line 15. So that's line 15, db connection line 15 here. All right. So it's telling us that the db connection wasn't made. So it makes sense because first of all, this variable doesn't seem to exist. So that's the main thing. So if I create it here, let me create that variable here and then assign null to it. So it won't contain anything, and if this happens, then it is going to be different from null. So now I can do the var dump here again and see. So in case this connection is not created successfully, we are going to have a null variable, and it won't tell me the same error again. Let's look at it. Great. So now it now tells me yes, the connection was actively rejected, but this time around my connection object is having the value of null because I initiated the variable here. So what happened? Why couldn't we connect to the database? So let's look at that. So we have DSN. So let's see if we have followed the instructions properly. So it says that here we have to say DSN database MySQL, then the database user, the database password. So DCN user password, DSN user password. I always say DCN. So DSN user password. So let me look at it again. DSN user password. So the DSN, let me look at the structure very well. So we have my SQL. Okay, let me hard code it first and see what I have. Let me hard code it like this. So in my case, I'm going to have a database name is PHP Broadcasting Network. The host is like that, and that's it. Okay, let me try this. So still the same. So instead of let's say localhost, so yes, so I'm having an issue with my database system here. Here password, let's see password. I don't know if I've set any password somehow. So that's not the password. Okay, so it basically means somehow my database, my SQL installation might have a password, and in fact that's why I could not log into it using my command line cmd, and I'm still surprised how Heidi is able to connect to it. So if I look at the connection again, it doesn't seem to have a password. So, and that is one problem. That is a problem. So there's no password. So why is it not connecting? Okay, so after a long run digging, I finally found out why we couldn't connect to our database. So basically, I was having the password set as empty string, as this, like this. So, and it seems this empty string is considered as a character for the password. So I don't know, I just did that and it works. It's still the same thing. So I don't know why, but this wasn't working. Let me go ahead and do it again. Still, it wasn't working. And this is surprising. This is surprising. And when I changed this into null, it was able to connect, and now it seems it's working perfectly. So all right, see, if that is done, now we have the connection to our database, which is great. So we made our connection available to our index page. So it means where we have this var dump, I could take this out to avoid polluting this connection file. And then once we have the connection, we should have the variable db connect made available to us here. So if I go ahead and refresh, I should still get the same result. So once that's done, our system, we have the connection to the database. So all we have to do now on this page here, what do we want? We want to get, let's say, get latest articles. So let's say we'll get like 5 maximum, 5 articles max. So that's what we would like to do here. And once we get the latest articles, then we would like to replace these dummy articles we have here with the actual articles from our database. So let's do that in our next episode, and see you then.